Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Casey Baggett and one of the ministers here at Lost Tree Chapel, and it's a joy to welcome you here today for our chapel talk. And what a privilege it is today to anticipate hearing from a speaker we know and love, and one whose background and experience will amply inform her talk today, which is entitled Growing with Grief, Imagery and Suggestions for Ourselves and Our Friends in Times of Loss. Jill Woolworth. Jill is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has 25 years of professional experience, during which she has walked with numerous clients facing loss and grief. She brings insight from that extensive professional experience to us today. Jill also brings her own personal experience with grief. 3 years ago, December of 2021, Jill lost her beloved life partner, Rick Woolworth, to a sudden, very unexpected death. So Jill's walk with grief has been both professional and personal. And we're here today, so many of us, I suspect, having known significant grief ourselves, or having friends and family members in grief. Jill's presentation this afternoon is offered to us with the goal of enabling us all, as her talk's title suggests, to find ways to grow through our grief. She has prepared her materials with great care, and I know will benefit from all of them, and I believe will also benefit from her deep wisdom on this matter, on grief. Would you please welcome our speaker, Jill Woolworth.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I am awed and just a little bit terrified to be up here right now. There's a couple of things I want to say before we get started. First of all, I promise you we will be out of here by 5 o'clock, okay? Because Casey is going to give me a little nod at 4:55, and while this is being recorded, it is not going to be recorded if we get to a question and answer time. So I just wanted you to be comfortable with that. So the other thing is please turn off your cell phones if you haven't already, and know that this is being live streamed, so if it's helpful to somebody, it's going to be up for about a month, and you can get it by going through the chapel to find the access point. So let's get going. My mother-in-law told me about 25 years ago that she would get a facelift when the surgeons figured out how to turn her upside down and gather every single wrinkle from the ankles to the top of her head. I wasn't very interested at that time, but I would be now. Next slide, please. I can tell from your chuckles that you might be. So why don't we turn us all upside down? Can you imagine walking into the fitness center and seeing all of your friends hanging like bats? But sadly, the truth is, even if we could turn us all upside down and get rid of all of our wrinkles, we are still aging. Next slide, please. Even with our state-of-the-art medical care and our excellent diet and all the exercise that we get here at Lost Tree, we can't escape the Grim Reaper. Life is a bit like musical chairs. We just don't know or ultimately control when our chair will be removed, despite our best efforts to live healthy lives, and we sure don't want to talk about it. The average age here at Lost Tree is 71.7 years old. There are 62 members of this club who are 90 or over, and 12 to 15 of us die every year. And yet, grief and death are taboo subjects. It would be easier for me to get up here and talk to you about sex, religion, politics, or money. This subject of grief and death is just off the table. So what in the world am I doing up here? Next slide, please. I'm here to help us talk about it. I want to offer you some comfort, I want to offer you some hope, and I want to offer you some tools. The first 6 months after Rick died in December of 21, 4 word pictures came to me that I found healing and helpful. I'm sharing them today as one friend to another, suggestions and certainly not shoulds. Many of you in this audience could share equally well because you have walked through the pain of grief yourselves. Many of you have helped me on my own journey. This community has been incredibly supportive, and for that, I thank you all. Next slide, please. So first, let's talk about loneliness, the greatest mental health challenge in our modern era. Loneliness is exponentially heightened when a loved one dies. Death hurts at the deepest level. It sucketh is a little-known term in the Old Testament. Actually, I made it up. But it feels like the truth, because when someone we love dies, it sucketh. It is excruciatingly lonely and disorienting. Next slide, please. We feel alone, as if the world has tilted on its axis, but we're the only ones sliding off the planet. How can other people be driving their cars, playing golf, getting groceries, laughing, and just living their daily lives as if nothing has happened? Next slide, please. Soon after Rick's death, God showed me a picture of a giant lake, the lake of loss. All around the edge of the lake, all along its edges, were thousands of people peering across the lake to see if there was anyone else there. Everyone at the lake had experienced loss. They were simply shy to talk about it, so they stared out across the lake. Next slide, please. The truth is that every adult you meet has peered across the lake of loss. It may be a professional loss, a financial loss, a physical loss, a financial loss, a key relationship, or the death of a loved one. I don't think you can be older than 12 without having experienced some kind of loss. At 12, it might be you didn't make the baseball team or your best friend ditched you, but that feels like loss, and it all counts. So please help me for a moment. Would you stand up if you or someone close to you has experienced a major loss in the last year? Would you please stand up? And please stay standing. And now please stand up if you or someone close to you has experienced a major loss in the last 5 years. Okay. And now please stand up if you have experienced any kind of loss in the last decade of anything. Okay. Look at the person on the right and left of you. Look in their eyes for a moment. There's nobody still seated. We are not alone around this lake of loss. You can sit down now. God doesn't weigh the relative pain of our losses, and neither should we. Whether someone dies after a long illness or dies suddenly, it hurts. All losses hurt. When we remember that we're not alone, that we are all peering across the lake of loss, it helps, because solidarity is comforting. We are not alone on that tilted planet. Still, even if I knew I wasn't alone, I had a bigger problem. I could barely breathe because I was sure that I was going to bleed out. Next slide, please. The image I had of my marriage was that Rick and I were a tall oak tree that had grown together for almost 50 years. If half of it was gone, I could no more survive than a tree that had been cleft in half by lightning. But God showed me that Rick by himself was that beautiful oak tree. When he died, that oak tree fell, mercifully not taking out any other trees in the forest. I was not half of that oak tree. I was still here, a living, breathing, healthy understory tree. Next slide, please. Understory not in the sense of being less than, but simply because I was 8 inches shorter than Rick. I no longer have the protection from the wind and the rain and the weather that I had when Rick was alive. I miss his shade. There's a hole in the forest where he once stood, But our roots in the ground are still intact, and they are intertwined forever. Trees nourish each other in this way, even in death, and I believe that our loved ones do too. So I'm a healthy tree like this dogwood, and I am not alone. You and I are still here. We have each other. We are part of a family forest with strong branches for one another. But it doesn't stop there. So I'm a healthy tree, and I have lots of company around the lake of loss. But damn it, this isn't what I expected in my 60s. In our late 90s, maybe, perhaps like most of you, Rick and I planned to die in our sleep in our late 90s, holding hands, and we wouldn't know anything about it. Doesn't that sound like a familiar plan? All of our parents had lived into their 90s. My mom is turning 94 next month. We were doing the right things to live long and healthy lives. Why shouldn't I feel angry and cheated and resentful? Next slide, please. Well, I know as a therapist that dealing with resentment requires one of two things, either changing a boundary or changing an expectation. I couldn't change the boundary. Rick was dead. But I could reevaluate my expectations of more decades together. I could challenge the idea of being gypped because Rick didn't live into his 90s or even into his 70s or his 80s. I thought about the amazing vacations that we had taken together and how even when there were flight delays or rainy weather or sometimes illness due to funky food or funky water and lost luggage, we were always grateful for the vacation. Next slide, please. We weren't resentful that a 2-week vacation wasn't a 3-week vacation. We weren't even angry that our entire family's luggage arrived on the day that we were leaving from a 5-day beach vacation. Vacations were wonderful. Expectation makes all the difference. What if I could consider my 48-and-a-half-year relationship with Rick with a vacation lens and put one over the other? Some people don't have 48 days of a good relationship. I had 48 years. When I can put a vacation lens over my marriage, it helps me lean into gratitude instead of self-pity. Cicero said that gratitude is the father of all virtues. I think it's probably true, and I think that's probably why it's so hard. Some days are better than other days. Gratitude is a choice we can only make for ourselves, and it certainly doesn't come right away. Please don't ever tell a friend to be grateful after a loss. When well-meaning friends tried to tell me about my good fortune, I wanted to punch them. To tell someone to be grateful for what they had or for what they still have is hurtful. It's offensive. Gratitude has to come from within ourselves, and it cannot be rushed. Gratitude itself is a gift. Next slide, please. So let's tie these 3 images together. We're not alone because we stand together around the lake of loss, even if it's invisible. We are healthy trees still standing. And when we're able to adjust our expectations, even for a little while, we can choose gratitude over grumpiness. Next slide, please. The last of the 4 images that I want to share with you came from a friend. She described grief as a hard black ball, like a bowling ball, tightly packed in the square box of our life. The first day after a loss, we can barely breathe because there's so little air in the 8 tiny corners of the box. The painful wrecking ball of grief presses on us 24/7. We can't get away from it. Next slide, please. It's impossible to feel sane or hopeful or sometimes to even want to go on living when that ball hits our insides. I remember lying on the bedroom floor hyperventilating while one of my daughters on the phone was trying to walk me through some yoga breathing to calm me down. Next slide, please. Grief makes us want to shut down, give up, numb the pain, find someone to blame, bargain with God, get angry, depressed, try to deny the truth, or run away from the loss. Believe me, I've tried most of those. When the sandcastle of my marriage washed out to sea with one giant wave and no warning, I felt all my love and my hope go with it. Next slide, please. And yet, every day, the box of my life around the grief ball gets one day bigger. A little more air and sunlight come in. I drew these pictures in my journal about 3 months after Rick died. The third picture was more of a prayer and an aspiration than a reality, and it still is. With each new day, the grief ball doesn't press quite as hard as it did against the 6 walls of my life. It has more room to roll around, but not continuously as it did. Moments of beauty and color begin to come into the dark box of our lives. I call them joy bubbles or stars on a dark sky. Maybe noticing a sunset or beautiful music or a new friendship, or maybe for some of you, hitting a golf ball perfectly straight. Next slide, please. As the box of our life gets bigger, the grief ball changes too. We don't get over our grief. We don't get through our grief. And it really bothers me when people think that we should or that we can. Nor does time heal grief like a broken arm will heal almost as good as new. We grow with grief every day because that grief is inside us. That's why they call it a broken heart. But the good news is that grief can soften and shrink if we take care of ourselves and allow others to take care of us. To grieve well is to receive well. Let me repeat that. To grieve well is to receive well. And this is hard for us competent, self-reliant people who are used to running things. But the way our grief ball shrinks is to accept the support of others and let the tears flow. We can't run away from the grief that's inside us, no matter how hard we try. We were created to live in community. It's humbling, and at times it's embarrassing. I remember early on having to leave a lovely dinner party because I just couldn't stay any longer because the pain of the grief made it impossible. Receive all the comfort and care that you can, whatever that looks like for you. I light a candle almost every morning. An older friend made that suggestion, and sometimes it was all I could do, but I love the tradition. And many of you know that I had dinner with friends and family for 109 straight nights after Rick died, because nighttime, dinner time, was the hardest time of day for me. When anyone asks what they could do for me, I would say, please invite me for dinner. I still say, please invite me for dinner. For other people, though, the hardest time of day is first thing in the morning or weekends. Ask specifically for what you want when you are grieving, and ask your friends specifically what they want. Your friends aren't mind readers, and we are all different. We have to let go when we're grieving of being primarily caregivers and become care receivers. I was literally held up by friends and family, and many of you are here in this room. Thank you again. I wouldn't be standing here without your support. Next slide, please. Time does help. Memories eventually become sweeter and less painful because there's more room in the box of our lives every day. There will always be moments when sadness comes, but intense grief gradually becomes mourning, and mourning eventually can evolve into grateful remembrance. I see myself as still toggling between moments of mourning and grateful remembrance. That tsunami of our losses morphs into big waves, and those big waves become little waves lapping. There will always be a hole where our loved one was, but it is survivable. Next slide, please. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first letters of these 4 word pictures, lake, oak, vacation, and everyday, spell the word loved. I certainly had no idea that it would work out that way when these images came to me. The lake of loss, the oak tree, the vacation lens, and the everyday box. I believe that we are all loved, that we were loved, and that we always will be loved. I don't always feel it, but I believe it. And we can believe it for each other when our own confidence is shaky. The kindness of friends and family is hugely important. The love of God is in the hands and hearts of those around us, and we are those hands and hearts for each other. The choices that we make over time will determine whether we grow into grateful or grumpy people, strong trees or gnarled trees, compassionate people who see others across the lake of grief, the lake of loss, or angry, bitter people who only feel our own pain. Life has always been the story that we tell ourselves. We're on this journey together. We're all walking each other home. We will all grieve. And there is something sacred about the holy ground of broken hearts. Compassion and vulnerability create connection. Look around you again. Look around. No matter how well put together we may look, we are all in this together. We can choose to see each other around the lake of loss or to not acknowledge that it exists. We can choose to see ourselves as firmly rooted trees with deep roots nourished by our grief. We can eventually choose to be grateful for the gifts that we have been given. This is by far the hardest set of choices I have ever made, and I have to remake them often. The same may be true for you, and it's helped me to share them with you today. Next slide, please. So let's start with suggestions for those who are grieving. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just a list of suggestions based on my personal and professional experience. Many of you in this room could double this list, and I hope you will. Next slide, please. First of all, move slowly. I knew from years of experience as a professional therapist that grief was exhausting, but I didn't know how physically exhausting it is, mentally exhausting. Yes, your brain actually hyphenates when you have a loss and you're not able to string thoughts together. Reading was impossible for me for 3 months, but it's physically exhausting, like recovery from anything. But that's why I encourage you to move slowly. And then defer, delete, and delegate everything possible. That's contrary to how we normally live our lives, but it's tied into that physical and emotional exhaustion. And third, seek personal touch. We're mammals. Ask for hugs, get massages. We were created more to be a pile of puppies instead of to suffer alone. We need that human touch. Every day, we could do 3 little things. 1 social contact. It could be as little as picking up the phone to call a friend. 1 spiritual practice. It could be as simple as lighting a candle, which for me was a symbol of hope. And get outdoors. What I love about getting outdoors is nature expects nothing of us. There's no to-do list. And it right-sizes us. It reminds us that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And that getting outdoors doesn't mean to run a race. It could simply mean to walk around the block. Take yourself to places of truth and beauty, a beach, a museum, a church. You can just sit there. You don't have to do anything. And let the beauty of that wash over you. And let the tears come without apology. So often we cry, we go, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. But this is part of our common experience. Within reason, if we let our tears come, people see our humanity. And by the way, it also helps to soften that grief inside. Give yourself permission to come late to an event and to leave early. You just don't have the energy to do more, and sometimes small talk is beyond your ability. It will get better, but I think it's important to know you can just show up and make that social contact without having to say hello to everybody there. And then this is one that I found helpful to me. Put up a hand if people's questions or intended condolences are too much. Many well-meaning people would come at me with stories, and I didn't have the words. I just had to say, hey, Joe, hey, Jan, I know you mean well, but I just can't go there right now. And somehow having that hand just help me. It wasn't, shaming. It wasn't anything else. It was just like, I need your help. I can't go there right now. So I found that hand a very helpful tool. Obviously, eat, drink, and sleep as best you can. We would all love to do that, but it's hard. And then I like this one, get mad at God. Go ahead and yell, preferably in your car or in the privacy of your home, but he can take it. There's nothing he hasn't heard, and scream when you need to. Believe me, I did. We have to get these feelings out. If we try to stuff them and pretend they're not there, that's like having stage 4 cancer and ignoring it. Whatever you need to get your pain out, I like to journal. Other people want to vent to save people. I actually like both. We need to be seen. We need to feel soothed, seen, safe, and secure. And we can't do that all by ourselves. We are built to be in a community. And the last one on this list is hope. I made this up about a year ago because I was still struggling. I thought, well, darn it all, what can I do every day? I said, okay, if I'm really down, I can help someone. That's what the H stands for. I can call up somebody who's struggling in a different way, perhaps. Somebody who may have a bad diagnosis, or somebody else whose kid is misbehaving. I can help someone else. Then you've heard me say get outdoors before. Just get outside of your own house. It's important to take my body outside. And then play. That could be play golf, it could be play bridge, it could be play an instrument, it could play any form of that's play for you. It could be putting, it could be arranging flowers, but something that's not goal-oriented, because playing is really important for us. And then finally, exercise. We all know the value of endorphins, but certainly in the early days, that doesn't mean a crazy workout. It means going for a walk. So that's my little formula, and when I'm really down, I just think, what's my hope formula? What's my hope formula? And it genuinely has probably been one of the most helpful things that I'm sharing with you for me. So let's go to the next slide, please, Chris. Helping other people. I think most of you are here today because you want to know how to be helpful to your friends who are grieving. We often don't know what to do or what to say, and many of the things on this list are things I wish I'd known before Rick died. I cringe now when I think of some of the condolence letters that I wrote once upon a time. Let's go to the list. Don't offer advice or platitudes or say at least anything. At least you had him for 48 years. At least you have children and grandchildren. At least blah, blah, blah. Again, I want to punch somebody. Please don't say at least anything. Remember what I said about that gratitude has to come from the person herself or himself? If you try to put it on top of somebody, it just feels, frankly, shaming. It's hurtful because we're not in that place. And platitudes are things, like, oh, God needed another angel in heaven, and just things that make my skin crawl. They're not helpful. I didn't particularly appreciate the formulaic cards that have the little pre-printed message. I would encourage you to write your own message, to have some version of, it's awful, I love you, I'm here. That's the truth. And then if you knew the person, to tell some funny stories or to talk about how this person influenced your life and how they helped you. But the cheesy sympathy cards that are just signed by you, those are not as easy to receive and they're not as meaningful. Don't try to cheer them up or change their mind. This is really important. When you're grieving, your brain is not working properly. And if somebody is coming at you and saying, oh, don't feel that way, Gretchen, that's not okay. You need to feel this way, let's do this. It's denying your reality. And that is hard for the brain. It actually creates more fear because you don't feel seen and soothed and understood. Rather, instead, if I say, of course you feel that way. How could you want to live right now? I'm not going to make it worse. Our fear is that if we validate someone's pain, we're going to make it worse for them. But it's exactly the opposite. It's saying, I see you. I don't always think you're going to feel that way. But today, I get it. and I might feel that way too. So we spend a lot of time trying to cheer people up, and sometimes the best way is simply to say, would you like to go to a movie with me? Would you like to do an activity with me? Distraction is fine, but to go head on and try to change someone's mind when they're not in their right mind, that doesn't help. And then offer specific services, like an airport pickup if there's going to be a memorial service, or dinner on Friday. Many people, well-intentioned, would say, let me know if there's anything I could do for you. Well, my mind is a scrambled egg. I don't know what you can do for me, but if you offer something concrete, is really helpful. And then the person can say yes or no. Obviously, it'll depend on the situation that you're in. And then instead of saying, how are you? It's much more helpful to say, how are you today? How are you today, Joe? How are you feeling today? Because obviously, I'm hurting. I feel terrible, but today I might be feeling better because I got a good report from a doctor or I heard from a grandchild. How are you today helps me and anyone who's grieving to live in the present, because we tend to extrapolate into the scary future or to just get stuck looking in the back. But how are you today helps us to live in the present, and that's really important. And then generally, be quiet. I have a great friend in this community to whom I was telling a lot of the unhelpful things that people have said, and he said, well, darn it all, Jill, what should I say? And I'm not saying his name, but we'll call him Bill. I said, Bill, just show up and shut up. Your presence is what makes all the difference. We're often talking to comfort ourselves. We want to help people, but we can't bring that person back from the dead. We can't change that cancer diagnosis. We can't do that for them. We need to do what I call sit in the pit with them, with their pain. And most of the time, fewer words are better than more. And please don't say, I know how you feel, because you don't. You don't know exactly how they feel. And it's respectful to not assume that you know how somebody feels, because everyone's grief is a little bit different. Ask them a question, how are you today? But you don't know exactly how they feel. And then keep your visits short, especially in the beginning. But do invite them to share a meal. Even when we're grieving, we have to eat. Most of us who grieve lose a lot of weight because we don't want to fix food. But if you invite me over for a hamburger at 5 o'clock, that's helpful. And if I only have to stay 25 minutes, that's really helpful. Obviously, it's changed now, but to bring people food so that they can sit home alone and eat, that may not be so helpful. It's nicer, even if it's with your 5-year-old granddaughter, to come and have a hot dog. So the next to the last point is ask, don't assume what they are ready for or what they would prefer. For example, don't assume that they would or would not want to participate in a certain activity or serve on a certain committee or meet some person that you want them to connect with. Ask them, because we may have lost our loved one, but we haven't lost our minds. And it's a courtesy to be asked, what do you want? How do you feel about this? Would you like to do X, Y, or Z? And then, very important, continue to share memories about the person who died if you knew them, because we think about them every day, multiple times a day. So if Linda were to tell me a memory she has of Rick, that touches my heart, because I'm living with this 24/7, and it's very deeply meaningful. Many people think, oh, if I bring it up, it's just going to make him or her sad. No, it's just the opposite. It's comforting. So that is my very short summary of the things that I've learned in the last 1,171 days. And I'm now going to ask Chris to turn off the recording so we can have some questions and answers, and I promised you'll be out by 5. Chris, can you turn it off?